Everybody, Elizabeth Ham here. As we begin our study of American History 1 together, it's really important to understand what will be driving this course, including the key vocabulary that we will be talking about throughout multiple sections of this class. This course is going to be heavily focused on the driving question, how have conflict and compromise contributed to the development of political, socioeconomic, and cultural aspects of American society? Throughout this course, you are going to be asked to analyze primary and secondary sources from the Age of Discovery all the way through 1877. Together, we're going to analyze American history through the lens of conflict and compromise. And as you explore various aspects of political, socioeconomic, and cultural development of American society, you will be asked to collaborate. You will be asked to think critically. You will be asked to think about history in a new way that will truly empower you to have a different understanding as well as make a positive impact in the world today. We're going to be looking specifically about the complexities of life in North America, ranging before European arrival all the way through the American Revolution. We're going to talk about native ways of life. We're going to talk about methods of colonization. We're going to talk about the American Revolution, the rise of popular politics, sectionalism, and other topics. But again, this entire course is going to be focused around two words: conflict and compromise. When we look at the definitions of conflict and compromise, there are multiple ways that you can define these two terms. As we move through defining these key terms, it's important for you to really look at the multiple perspectives of these definitions, and then be able to form your own understanding of the definitions of conflict and compromise. When we look at the term conflict could be considered a fight, a physical fight, a battle, or a war, something like an armed conflict. A conflict could be something that is competitive or opposing action. It could be looking at two different ideas or having two different interests and those two things colliding together. A conflict could also be defined as a mental struggle that really roots from having opposing needs or different drives, different wishes, or external or internal demands. And it really could also be the opposition of people or forces that rises into a dramatic action like we talk about in literature. However, on the other side, we have compromise. Compromise could be defined as the settlement of differences, reaching a common consent or a mutual understanding, something that falls in the middle, something intermediate between or blending qualities of two different things. So how are we going to meet in the middle and combine those ideas? Or it could be a concession to something derogatory, something that really comes together. Where is that middle ground? Where is the color gray in my understanding of black and white? So as you think about conflict and as you think about compromise, again, I want you to think about both of these terms. I want you to look at the multiple definitions that are provided. We're going to be looking at two different videos, one for conflict and one for compromise. And then at the very end, your expectation for this week is going to be to write a discussion board about your understanding of conflict and compromise. Before we begin watching the next video, I again want to bring you back to this driving question. How have conflict and compromise contributed to the development of political, socioeconomic, and cultural aspects of American analysis of the two key terms that will drive our focus throughout American History 1? I want us to look specifically at the word conflict. Now, just a few minutes ago, we talked about the dictionary definition of the word conflict, and there are varying definitions throughout the dictionary and throughout our history. This could be from personal experiences, this could be through the events from history. And right now what we're going to do is I'm going to add another layer of understanding to your perspective of conflict. As you're watching this video, I want you to think about these questions. In your own words, how might you define conflict? How do you believe that conflict has contributed to American society? And do you believe that conflict is viewed as negative or positive in today's society, and why? Now, the answers to these questions don't necessarily have to be documented, but your discussion board for this week will be a summary of what you have learned throughout the definition of these key vocabulary words. So I would be sure to take notes and to notate what you are thinking as you are.
I've heard it described as a volcano that's about to erupt, a hurricane, like slow dancing, barefoot on broken shards of glass, like trying to hold back the ocean with a broom. War, the plague, like being drawn and quartered. These are just a few examples of thousands of metaphors I've collected about conflict. What's conflict like for you? Your metaphor matters because it often reflects how you think and feel about conflict. So it makes sense that if you think conflict is the plague, you'd probably want to avoid that and avoid everybody else that has it too. If it's like trying to hold back the ocean with a broom, I would imagine that feels frustrating and futile. So what do you do when the waves just keep coming? Because conflict washes ashore in all of our relationships, at home, at work, in our neighborhoods. You've probably already been given advice on how you should deal with it. Communicate. But sometimes talking about it seems to make it worse. Don't go to bed angry. So you stay awake and now you're angry and tired. Or you just have to learn to compromise. But if your compromise has ever felt like you don't get what you want, I don't get what I want, but at least together we're mutually miserable. Now, I'm sure all of this advice is well-intentioned, but it treats conflict as if it's a problem. What if conflict isn't a problem? What if it's a solution? What if it's not negative, but full of beauty? After 15 years of studying, researching, teaching, and training in conflict, I've learned to see it differently. I've been able to see the power it has to transform us, our relationships, and the world around us. It can be difficult, though, to create that change. And it means we have to start looking at conflict differently. No matter how negatively you think about conflict right now, it is possible to change that. It takes 3 keys in order to do that. The first is to recognize what our conflict is really about. I have a 4-decade-long history of fighting about the dishes. When I was a kid, I hated doing dishes, and I fought with my parents and my siblings on nearly a weekly basis about whose turn it was. When I got to college, I fought with my roommates about the dishes because sometimes they'd go home for the weekend and they'd leave behind their dirty dishes with their half-eaten burritos with congealed ketchup and bowls of funky fermenting green Lucky Charm milk in the sink. When I got married, I fought with my wife about how you're supposed to do the dishes and if it even counts as doing dishes if you don't rinse the sink out afterwards. With my own kids, I've fought about the dishes, about them not dirtying 15 cups a day because they get a new one every single time they get a drink of water, and trying to get them to help load and unload the dishes. I mean, maybe I'd have just switched to paper plates. But maybe it's not about the dishes. As I think back, as a kid, it wasn't about the dishes, it was about independence, wanting to make my own decisions. With my roommates, it wasn't about the dishes. It was about wanting to feel respected and wondering if they valued the relationship the same way that I did. With my wife, it's not about how I do the dishes. It's wanting to feel competent and likable no matter how I do them. With my kids, it's not about the dishes. It's about my identity as a father, trying to teach them respect and responsibility. You see, conflicts are a lot like icebergs. What we see on the surface may seem small, but what's underneath can send boats like the Titanic to the bottom of the ocean. And if I don't pay attention to what's underneath my own conflicts, it can rip holes in my relationships. Conflict is about so much more. about our identity, our relationships, the things that really matter to us. And as you're thinking about your own conflicts, maybe you can start to see that they might be about something more. Now, once you recognize what your conflicts are really about, the second key is recognizing when you're stuck. Now, I am no stranger to being stuck in conflict. I started learning about conflict because I was terrible at it. Well, a couple of years ago, I asked my 4-year-old daughter to put away a couple of hair pretties that she had gotten out. You know, hair pretties, like little bows and rubber bands, stuff you put in your hair to make it pretty. So she took them, but she chucked them on the floor of the bathroom. And I said, you can't just put them there on the floor. You need to pick them up and put them in the tray with the rest of the hair pretties. She said, I don't want to put them in the tray. I don't want to do it. And I said, you got them out. You have to put them away. She said, I don't want to. You started throwing a fit. So she's laying on the floor. So I get down on the floor next to her, and I put the little hair pretties right next to her hand, and I bring the tray over, and I'm just like, you just put them in the tray. Okay? And she said, I don't want to, and flips the tray. 20 more hair pretties go flying over the floor. So I'm like, line in the sand. You're not coming out of this bathroom until you pick up all the hair pretties. So she tries to rush past me. I block the door with my gigantic body, and she's flailing at me with her tiny little fists. And then 20 minutes later, I'm at the door trying to explain to my neighbor, who has brought a plate of cookies to welcome us to the neighborhood, why my daughter is screaming, trying to climb over a mattress that I've used to block the bathroom door. Now, that may be entertaining for you, but at the time, for me, not so much. Like, I was stuck. That was not working very well for me. Have you ever been in your own conflicts and thought, this is not working so well for me? See, the thing that gets me stuck there is justification. And justification is believing that I'm blameless. And it's so seductive. Because in conflict, if I'm blameless, then I don't have to do any of the work to change. I'm not the one that needs to change. Somebody else needs to change. And it keeps us stuck. As you think about your own conflicts, do you ever feel justified but stuck? You know, again, that might feel nice in the moment, but in the end, it's pretty dissatisfying. It keeps us doing the same conflicts over and over again, and nothing changes. You can get unstuck. If it's not working for you, you can find a different way. The third key in unlocking the beautiful, transformative power of conflict is to start learning to speak responsibly. To have those kind of conversations where we can create change in ourselves, in our relationships, in the world around us, it requires vulnerability, ownership, communication, acceptance, boundaries. It's hard work, though. It can be as hard as trying to learn a new language. I've created the acronym VOCAB to help you in those moments to think about how you can be responsible in your conflict, how you can create the change that you want. And it starts with vulnerability. Vulnerability is my willingness to let myself be seen, to share who I really am, how I really feel, even my mistakes, to share the needs that I have that are below the surface. Now, when I'm vulnerable, I take off my armor of justification and defensiveness. I put down my weapons of blame and accusation. And that can be terrifying. But it's beautiful because it disarms our conflicts and it creates the potential for us to connect instead of to fight. The O in vocab is for ownership. And ownership is taking accountability for my own needs, emotions, and choices. Have you ever wondered in a conflict, like, how did I get here? Maybe you're in the proverbial doghouse and you're sleeping on the couch. Or maybe your conflicts have escalated into the ridiculous and you have a mattress blocking the door of your bathroom. The beauty of ownership is when I look at my choices and my emotions in my conflicts, it starts to help me map the contributions that I make. I can see how I got here. I can see exactly which direction I'm headed. And if that's not working for me, it empowers me. I can shift direction. The third thing you need, and at the center of vocab, is our communication. We have to learn to ask, listen, and express. It's not enough that we communicate. It matters how we do it. So I had to learn to stop telling stories that ended with a period. I had to start asking questions, the kind of questions that help me understand what's underneath the surface of this conflict, to help me understand the emotions and needs. After I ask, I can listen. Not listening for the other person to make a mistake or for me to get defensive, but to listen to what's really important here, to hear their requests for change. And after listening, I can then express. Not just anger, but express with vulnerability and ownership how I really feel, what I want, what's important to me. And these conversations where I start to ask, listen, and express, they're so beautiful because they can create empathy and a different type of conversation. The A in vocab is about acceptance. And acceptance is embracing reality and letting go of what we can't control. There's very little that I can control in conflict. I can't even get my 4-year-old daughter to pick up 3 hair pretties. I often want to control how the other person feels and how they behave, but I have to let that go. I also have to recognize that because conflict is about change, there's going to be some loss involved. And sometimes it's just the loss of an idea. Once upon a time, I thought the relationships were supposed to be happily ever after. But the truth is, all relationships have conflict. And until I let go of that fairy tale and embrace the reality of my relationships, could I do anything when those difficulties came? Finally, the B in vocab is for boundaries. And boundaries are ground rules for acceptable behavior. Boundaries let other people know what I'm okay with and what I'm not okay with. This is important because even though it's difficult to say no and disappoint somebody, no is the foundation of trust. As a mediator, my role is to help people who are stuck in conflict to have a different kind of conversation. And the way we often begin that is by setting rules for how we're going to interact. It usually involves things like the parties determining we're not going to call each other names. We won't raise our voices. We're going to keep this conversation confidential. And the beauty of that is setting those boundaries and respecting them creates the foundation for trust. Now, understanding vocab, seeing how that works, isn't going to cure your conflicts. It's still difficult to do, and I still get stuck in justification. But when I practice it, just like practicing a new language, I become more fluent. And it's important because that is what creates the changes that I want in myself, in my relationships, and in the world around me. When my oldest daughter turned 6 and started the first grade, there started to be a lot of interactions with her sisters that ended with tears and yelling. She started to be kind of harsh. I mean, she'd always liked to be in charge, but she was kind of bossing her sisters around a lot. So I tried to put a stop to it. I lectured her on kindness, and nothing changed. I yelled at her. Nothing changed. I gave consequences and punishments, and it continued for weeks on nearly a daily basis. And I felt stuck. I didn't know what to do, and it was frustrating. Until one evening, I started practicing vocab and creating a conversation for change. As I was tucking her into bed, I kneeled down next to her, and I called her name softly, and I said, I don't know how to be the dad of a 6-year-old. I've never done this before, but I've been worried and sad. I don't know what's been going on between us and between your sisters. And I hate that I've yelled at you. I have to own that. I don't want that. What I want is for us to be able to talk with each other, even when it's hard. I want us to have a good relationship. And I want to understand what's happening for you. Can you help me understand? And she said, I don't know, and crawled under the covers. So I worked on keeping my heart open. I laid next to her. I tried to breathe in and let go of my desire to have her respond. And then I had the air ripped out of me when I heard her say, Dad, have you ever been bullied? And for weeks, she'd been dealing with a bully at school and hadn't known what to do about it, how to talk about it. I asked her how she was feeling, I told her about how I was bullied when I was a kid. We discussed how she could set boundaries with kids at school. We talked about how do we want to communicate in the future? How do we deal with these hard emotions when they come? And that conversation changed me. And it changed our relationship. And it empowered us to continue creating the changes we wanted in the world around us. I no longer see conflict as negative. It's my chrysalis of change. It's a doorway of opportunity. It's the first ray of light after a dark night. What do you want it to be for you?
Through gaining a new and unique perspective about conflict, we will continue to look at our study of American history by discussing the word compromise. Please remember that we have talked about what compromise is as we've really met in the middle. As you're watching the video, I want you to think about the following questions. In your own words, how might you define compromise? How do you believe compromise has contributed to American society? And do you believe that compromise is viewed as negative or positive in today's society? And why do you believe that? Understand that the answers to these questions will not be required word for word. However, you will need to be able to talk about what you have learned and the ideas that you have been introduced to in your discussion board that is due this week.
I'd like to have us think together about an idea that is global and national and also deeply personal. I'd like to have us reclaim the lost virtue of compromise, a radical virtue. It was something that got me thinking about it when I talked with a pastor from Syria. He watches over about 10,000 refugees. As we were talking, I asked him, when Arab Spring happened, we expected democracy to spread out across the Middle East like wildflowers. That didn't happen. Why? And he said, we come from a long history of kings. And when we voted for a president, but we still thought like king, where one side wins and the other side loses. Whereas you Americans, you think in ways of a balance of power. You come to compromise with one another. And when he said that, the lights went on for me. I thought, that's really true. That is our history. You go back to the American Revolution, even to when they set up the United States Senate and the House of Representatives. They did it so that there would be deliberation, discussion, debate, where we would have to compromise. In fact, that organization of the House and the Senate, that was put together and it was termed the Great Compromise. Compromise is in our DNA. It's part of who we are. And yet today we seem to live in such angry times when compromise is thought of in terms of an insult even. Think about the Broadway play Hamilton. The play is about Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. They're friends. And yet Burr comes to think that their differences are something that are an insult. So he draws a line in the sand. He calls Hamilton out on a duel. The two of them have the duel, and Burr ends up killing Hamilton. What's the line in the play? I was too young and blind to see. The world really was broad enough for both Hamilton and me. Except now it's too late. For us today, we do live in those angry times. And for us, there's so many of us that seem to be drawing lines in the sand, calling for a win-lose duel. I think it's time for us to reclaim the lost virtue of compromise, to reclaim that lost virtue for what it is. Because when you get in some sort of conflict or duel, your brain tells your eyes literally to narrow the focus of vision, and it happens with our imaginations also. What compromise does is help us to begin to widen our range of vision. It begins to help us to see the big picture. It helps us to make the connections. I think about connections a lot. I do weddings. And some of the couples that come to see me, some of them have, in planning the wedding and experiencing this new relationship, their range of vision has begun to narrow. Did I say that gently? Okay. And I have the privilege of having a chance to talk with them and saying something along the line of, remember when you first fell in love? Remember when you first fell in love and at that moment the relationship was born. It's like an infant was born. And you not only have to admire the infant, you have to sacrifice for it. You have to sacrifice together. Now, not all of us aspire to be married, but all of us are in relationships. And those relationships have to do with the sacrifices that we make. I think that's the definition of compromise, the sum of the sacrifices that we make in order to be in relationship together. That's a little complex. Let me say that again. Sacrifice, the sum of, compromise, the sum of the sacrifices that we make in order to be in relationship with one another. It's not easy, but it's possible. It's possible, and I wish I could give you a better definition, but when you get into a definition of compromise, you're going to get into stuff that's very messy, because it's about the mystery of human relatedness. And we have to bring all of our imagination to come and make it work. But the bottom line test to see if you have compromised is if you have been in some sort of conflict and there's been a resolution when you walk away. If you are the only one who wins, you lose. And if the other person is the only one who wins, they lose. Because what you've lost is the relationship which has been broken. In real compromise, you both win in part, and you both lose in part, so that together something more can be born and something new can happen, something greater. Compromise is about our investing in one another so that we can move forward and upward together. And it's counterintuitive, but it's really true. If we want to create a world where there's more unity, we have to create space for more diversity. I learned about conflict from my father. My father grew up on the south side of Chicago. He was drafted in World War II. He served in France in some of the early days of the war. He didn't last very long. A shell fragment from a German 88 took him out. He was in 18 different hospitals over the course of 3 years before they finally figured out how to stitch him back together again. When he got out, there were a lot of things he could not do, but he never complained, and he found a way. He took every dime that he had and he opened up a restaurant on the south side of Chicago, his old neighborhood. Things went really well in the late 1940s and into the 1950s. And then there was what they call a sociological phenomenon called the Great Migration, when the northern industrialists lured a whole bunch of poor people from the south to come north and they'd have low wages. It ended up being a class war thing. My father saw what was coming. He knew he needed to move. But all these people coming into the neighborhood were poor. No one could afford to buy the restaurant. There was one woman, Miss Davis. Miss Davis, though, had no down payment and no collateral and no one to co-sign a loan with her. So no bank would give her a loan. She and my father could have been at loggerheads with one another, but they found a way to compromise. They found a way to compromise that looked like this. My father would give her the keys to the restaurant, which was, in essence, giving the keys, his life savings, to this perfect stranger. She, on the other hand, would need to make a payment every month on time. If she missed even one payment, he had the option to foreclose, and she would lose everything. Both of them were all in this compromise. She never missed a payment. She never missed a payment, and after that, they really didn't have any contact with each other. They'd lived hundreds of miles apart. Outside of annual Christmas cards, they didn't talk. But one day, 20 years later, in the middle of the afternoon, Miss Davis called my father up on the telephone, and she said, "I just wanted to say thank you for giving a young, poor, black woman a chance." And immediately he said right back to her, "Hey, I needed you as much as you needed me." See, that's what we need to remember and reclaim and embrace. When we compromise, we're admitting that we're in a relationship together, and that together we can do far more than we could ever have done on our own. But it only works when we admit that I need you as much as you need me. So today, if you hear someone drawing a line in the sand or calling for an either-or duel of some sort, I'd invite you to share this message with them about the radical virtue of compromise, the sum of the shared sacrifices that we make in order to be in relationship together. It's, if we admit it, what true leadership is, having the courage to compromise. It's the way the world works. It's the way life works. It's the way that our country works. Because the truth of the matter is, I need you as much as you need me.
Realizing the definitions of conflict and compromise, we are going to continue to dig deeper into how conflict and compromise contributed to the development of three specific aspects of American culture: political, socioeconomic, and cultural aspects of American society. As we look at these components of American society, it's really important for us to truly understand what each term means, so that as we are studying, you can begin to make connections and make relationships to your understanding of historical events, historical documents, and your experiences as a human being. When we look at the term political typically has to do with the government, something to do with the government. Maybe we're talking about governmental policy. Maybe we're talking about being involved in politics or party politics, looking at Republicans versus Democrats. We may also be thinking about how a society is run. So when we think about colonialism, we might be talking about the different ways that we enacted structure within the societies. So again, when we look at the word political, we are looking for historical documents, events, and examples of or relating to government or the conduct of government. When we talk about socioeconomic, okay, when we're looking at the socioeconomic component of American society, this is going to be a combination of social and economic factors within that society. I like to break this word down even more. When we look at the prefix, we look at the word socio. The prefix socio means social or society. And then the second part of the word economic means of or related to, based on the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. So when you put the two words together, we're not only looking at the money in the society, but we're also looking at how does the money affect how people fit into the society. This is exactly when we think about this, we're thinking about the different layers of how the hierarchy within a society is set up. As we continue to analyze those three major components, the cultural component of American society is very significant. The dictionary says that cultural means of or relating to culture. Culture can include racial, religious, or social groups. It could be a set of shared attitude, values, or goals. It could be social practices. Maybe it's the way that we do art. Maybe it's the human knowledge and belief that we share. Culture could also be considered an enlightenment, the way that we learn, the way that we educate ourselves, the way that we acquire our training and our understanding of society around us can also be considered cultural. So again, these are three quick definitions of three major words that are going to help us understand the realities of American society. So your job throughout this course is going to be to focus on this question. How have conflict and compromise contributed to the development of political, the establishment of government, socioeconomic, how does money affect how people are viewed in a society, and cultural aspects of American society? Now, I understand that this information is a lot very quickly, and the great thing about this is that I do not expect you today to be able to answer this question. But instead, today is the first day of many that we were going to be looking at these key vocabulary words and analyzing these components of American history. For your assignment this week, you are going to be spending some time reflecting and collaborating together. In 350 words or more, I would like for you to introduce yourself in our first discussion board. I want you to be sure to include your personal and your academic background. I want you to share your perspective of the key terms, conflict and compromise. From your perspective, based on the definitions and the videos and your own personal experience, what do these terms mean? Then I want you to focus specifically on these three key questions. What do you already know about conflict and compromise in American society? What is something that you already know right off the top of your head? Number two, what do you want to know about conflict and compromise? As you've been watching these videos, as you've been looking at the materials for this course, what are some things that you're interested in? What are some questions that you have? What do you want to know? And then the last focus question is going to be, how do you expect politics, culture, and socioeconomic status to play a role in the conflict and the compromise that we see throughout American history and in American society today? I'm really excited to start this journey of learning with you. I am excited to answer your questions, excited to learn alongside of you. Please don't forget that if you need help, if you need support, please reach out to me through email, through text message, or through phone call. I am more than happy to help you in any way that I can. Really looking forward to being your lead learner and experiencing this with you. Let me know if you need me.